Hello, I'm Georgia Raisman. I'm on Front Up with a friend and fellow Sconseter, Paul Judy. Paul is former head of A.G. Becker, an international investment bank, and in recent years an amateur historian of Sconset. He's been coming to Sconset with his family for almost 50 years, and we're going to talk today about Sconset, the village, and the summer life there, and also Paul's work with the Sconset Historic Research Group at the NHA. So thank you for coming, Paul. Thank you for being with us. Here. So let's start with when you came to Sconset. It was 1970, which is almost 50 years ago. And the village is not all that changed, and life in it is not all that changed from that time, has it?
Not in the slightest. There's more houses out at the edges of the old Sconset, and that's probably been going on for a long time. Right. As a matter of fact, Flagg bought all of Baxter Road in 1793.
This was...
And now look at Baxter Road and everything north of the edge of Sconset.
Right. Now, this was William Flagg?
William Flagg.
He is somebody who's been of interest to you in your interest in Sconset.
He has been, and I think he deserves a biography.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a feeling that will happen.
We're hoping that the NHA will be interested in that in due course.
Well, Sconset has been the subject of a number of your biographies, but before we get to them, why don't we talk about village life even now? I mean, there are still children going to the casino for tennis lessons, people on bicycles, and a pervading sense of peacefulness that hasn't changed over the decades.
No, as a matter of fact, the distinguishing feature of Sconset in historical terms, Nantucket historical terms, is it's very much part of Nantucket's history, but very separate. It is an absolute small community, and essentially the way I look at it, it draws people from all over the country who really want to be part of a community. And it's a very separate, distinctive community, which has been this way since almost the beginning, certainly since 1900.
And what's also interesting is that Sconset, as you know, but not everybody might know, that was originally a village where people who lived on Main Street in Nantucket came out to get away from Main Street on Nantucket.
Absolutely.
In the summer, which is sort of amusing to think of.
There's a publication about Main Street which relates how the houses, on the old houses in Sconset on Main Street, all built around 1820, were essentially the summer homes of counterparts on Main Street in Nantucket.
Which is amusing.
The ship owners and the ship captains.
Yeah. Although the village itself, we know, and not everybody might know, started as a fishing village and an early whaling village.
Absolutely.
With all those little tiny cottages that kind of grew by warts and by fits and starts.
Exactly. That's the old part of Sconset.
The very oldest part.
That's 1720 to 1800, that part of Sconset.
Yeah.
Wonderful little old houses that fishermen used, and then sea captains began to come, and then the missus began to make them more settled because she began to come.
Yeah, and lots of them, I understand, are still furnished with parts of boats that were found after shipwrecks, parts of boats that were found.
That was a standard procedure to get lumber off the coast, right, off the beach,
right, early form of recycling.
Make something out of it.
Right, an early form of recycling.
That's true.
So when you started coming, your interest in Sconset history started with an interest in the Sankaty Golf Club, right?
Yes,
and
it
then
did.
Kind of went from there.
And then it went from there. Sankaty Golf Club was essentially an outgrowth of the old Sconset Golf Club, which is still there, and a lovely old clubhouse. That clubhouse goes back many years to family ownership, and it was called Bloomingdale. Mm-hmm. And then that club became the social center of Sconset. And then I got interested in the history of Sconset per se, and then it went on from there.
And in 2008, the NHA had an exhibit that was centered on Sconset and its history.
And that exhibit put Sconset on the map, so to speak, within Nantucket. And the family thought that exhibit ought to somehow be captured for long-term purposes, and we funded, as you know, a book built about built around that exhibit.
So both
and
of
this
these,
was this one here.
That was this one.
And the history of Sconset.
And that's available at
the NHA bookstore. And then this one was about the Actors Colony, which again was something very unique in Sconset about 1900 and went on for about 20 to 25 years.
And this one was written by Betsy Tyler.
Written by Betsy.
Who has been the Obed Macy historian at the NHA.
And she's now a freelance writer here in Nantucket. And she just gave a talk about this lady right here. This is Agnes Everett. And she just gave a little talk about that, about her. She was very much part of Sconset in the 1920s and 30s.
It's interesting to think that, which something else people might or might not know, that the Sconset Actors Colony sort of persisted into the 20s and 30s. It was started by the errant actor or actress who found their way out to Sconset for the fresh air.
Yes.
And this was in an era when theaters were not air conditioned and people had the summer break, and drew together other people of the same persuasion.
Absolutely.
And then, interestingly, it seems to have spun over a little bit into the theatrical traditions of On the Isle, which were, for a long time, adult programs.
It did. And some of the main actors became central to the community theater in Nantucket. Of course, the main thing that led to the end of the Actors Colony in Sconset was the development of movie films in Hollywood. And so some of the wonderful actors and actresses went to Hollywood. Especially the Webb brothers.
They had voices
they had voices
they could translate into films.
And also it was wonderful weather out in Nantucket, out in Los Angeles too. So it was like Nantucket in that sense.
Well, that theatrical tradition, even though it became amateur theatricals with On the Isle, really persisted in the community as adult theatricals for decades, and then ultimately children's theatricals, which On the Isle still does.
Yes.
And your children and my children were all involved in those things, which I think helps us become part of that community. It certainly helped me learn about
and it all was built around the centrality of the casino, which was built about 1890. And
as a community center.
And as a community center all these years.
Right, right. It was structured ultimately as a private club, but initially it was a community center and really has functioned that way. There are many community functions there.
And you know, before the casino, the railroad depot was the community center, among others. The Sconset Club was the old golf club.
Yeah.
But now we have no more railroad.
Right.
That itself is a wonderful piece of Sconset history, is the railroad.
Right, and it got sort of washed away, didn't it? It was a combination of being washed away and the need for iron in World War I. Was that the
and remember the automobile came into being.
That too.
And people began to drive from downtown out to Sconset. There was a bus and so on.
Yeah. So tell us about the Sconset History Research Group.
Well, this was kind of my invention out of the work I'd done on the Sconset history, in the sense that I felt it would be wonderful if more people could be involved, if there could be more of a systematic approach to research. It turned in also we could have an annual Sconset History Night, which will be coming up next Monday night, I think it is.
It's Monday, August 14th.
The 14th.
And what time is that?
That's about, well, you show up any time between 6 and 6:30 and 7,
Is
something.
that at the casino?
At the casino, and I think it officially is at 7. And time to get home and get some supper, or get before if you want.
And that will be a talk on
this
the lighthouse.
Week is going to be a talk on the lighthouse, which is very much a part of Sconset history.
Yeah.
Goes back to 1850 something.
Yeah.
And people always used to walk out to the lighthouse from Sconset, and it led to a lot of imagery about that walk and the feeling of Sconset.
Well, that too, the bluff path itself is a very interesting thing. I mean, the fact that there should be a public way with easements along Baxter Road.
Of course, some of that bluff path is gone with erosion.
But the very fact that it existed and still exists in
There's
part,
a piece that exists, and then there's a little piece up on the other end, too.
Yeah. Well, it's very...
Something's missing in between.
Right. Well, I think, and this is a decade after the lighthouse was moved, isn't it? Wasn't it 2007 that it was moved?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the moving company is going to be there. The people who moved the lighthouse are going to be there to talk about.
I was there at that.
The process of moving.
That was an amazing event.
Fascinating. Yeah. My grandson actually moved the lighthouse.
Oh, how
he
exciting.
pressed the button and it went 1 inch, so he moved it.
Well, that's the kind of thing that Sconset allows you to do. It allows you to be part of a community in a very visceral and meaningful way that for over generations, which is a very rare thing in American society these days.
I often mention to my wife that we have more friends in Sconset than back in Northfield or down in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of place where you make friendships.
Yes.
And it's very community oriented.
Yes, yes, and I think the other thing too is that it's more outreaching than one would think. I mean, when we came to Sconset 20-something years ago, we found very many people very welcoming and very willing to bring us into things as they were happening.
No
to
question.
Take our children in. It's not an off-putting place at all.
Matter of fact, it's going way back to David Gray, who founded the golf club there. The emphasis has always been on simplicity,
mm-hmm.
simple dress, enjoyment, being outside, being on the beach,
right.
Being bicycling.
Right.
That's been the theme of Sconset all these years.
It's nice to have those values still, because these days a lot of the simplicity and being back in touch with things are kind of getting lost on that.
Difficult elsewhere.
It's hard. So we mentioned the Lighthouse Talk. I also wanted to think about what you were trying to encourage people interested in Sconset history, how you were trying to encourage them to help. How should people try to, if they're interested in helping out with the history research
project? Well, Bob
project,
Felch is now the overseer of the historic research effort.
Bob Felch.
I'm Bob Felch, who formerly the head of the Sconset Trust, lives in Sconset. I'm going to still be involved. Nance, probably Betsy will continue to be involved. Mm-hmm. Michael May is involved. Any of us can be contacted if there's any interest in doing research or participating in research planning. I've actually developed what might be called a topology of all the research possibilities that exist about Sconset. It's a long list. And also we'd rely very much on what the individual might want to do. For instance, street names in Sconset have always been an interest of mine. Number have changed, number of questions, how did they come about? What was the inspiration? Some of that would be hard to determine. But now that the Inc and M is digitized, and I don't know if everybody knows that.
I'm not sure everybody
But going
does.
to the Athenaeum website, you can actually go to the Inc and M and you can read online, and you can search by keyword back to about 1850. And that's
excellent.
a long way back.
Yeah, that is excellent.
And most newspapers don't even have that life.
Yeah.
And I remember the days when I used to go to the Athenaeum or to the NHA through a machine, the Athenaeum. I remember actually going to the newspapers and flipping through, trying to find things. It was almost impossible. You obviously miss things. With digitization, you do not miss anything. It's all caught.
And does the NHA have collections that are relevant to Sconset that are?
They have quite a lot of Sconset materials that are paper materials. They have books. They have extensive house research, and they have all the books that are written about Sconset. But the real history is in that Inc and M, and it's fascinating.
So people could take up a project involving either the street that they live on in a specific way or a more general way. We were talking the other day about communications in Sconset, ranging from when Captain Baxter used to go and try to blow his bugle to get people to pick up the mail, to Marconi.
Well, and interestingly, Captain Baxter, there's never been a really good bio of him. And how he got that job, and of course it was an official job back then. I think maybe his mother had something to do with that, though, too, because she was, I think, the official male person in Sconset. But he was an interesting character. There's a lot of characters that could be written about in Sconset over time, too. And Sconseters would enjoy digging into that because it'd be very local in nature.
Right. And then there has been the biography of Underhill, who developed all those tiny little cottages that were mimicking the older cottages.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah.
And we did get the NHA to do a bio on him. And as in the case of Flagg, he had all kinds of interests even before he came to Sconset. Then he became the PR guy for Sconset. He wrote And he was an early advertising genius. He wrote the most beautiful copy about Sconset, and he attracted a lot of people to his cottages.
Well, I think that Sconset, like Nantucket, has been the subject of a lot of land development. And we happen to live across the street from a so-called paper road, which I had never heard of before. But there were all of these roads laid out down near the water, which never became feasible to build on.
Right.
But there were developers out there in the 1890s and 1880s thinking about who were going to build houses in these tiny roads down on the beach.
Land development in Sconset is centered around 3 or 4 or 5 people. First place, the Coffin family owned a good deal of property way back before Sconset became much more than
And
just
still do.
Still do. Then there was the Ellis ownership. He had a partner that owned where the Beach House Hotel used to be, and that area, the South Bluff, so to speak. Then Mr.
Now
Flagg,
Ocean Avenue.
and then Underhill developed his unique cottages on 3 streets, and then Flagg owned all the land north, which ended up being land of the golf club and all of Baxter Road. Then there were various other small developers. There's a little section of Sconset right at the corner of Coffin and School, right in there, that was developed by a young man from downtown, pretty young, I forget his name, but he was about 1920.
Wow.
So there's been, and then of course since then, there's been development all around the edge. But thank goodness, the Sconset Trust especially has preserved great chunks of land.
And on the Sconset Trust's website, there is a page for the Sconset Historic Research Group, which has a series of postcards, a slideshow of postcards from the NHA, and I think amplified more postcards, because there are all sorts of views of Sconset ranging back into the 19th century up to the 1960s.
Mr. Wire, if I remember right, he was one of the great guys with a camera making postcards. And some of those postcards are very valuable today.
Well, they
They're
do give us
rare.
they give us an image of a little village that.
And I think, here's some postcards there.
They give us an image of a village that I have heard referred to as Brigadoon, in the sense that it goes to sleep in the winter. There are some winter residents, then it wakes up in the summer, and there's no place like it in the world.
No place like it.
Well, thank you for coming, Paul. This has been a huge pleasure. I hope to have you back again.
Thank you, Georgia,
It's been a
very
joy.
much.
Thanks.
Enjoy it.